Welcome back, minors. My name is Amber Johnston. I'm a counselor here in Student Wellbeing.
And I'm Tracy Kriegel, and I'm also a counselor here in Student Wellbeing. And it's time for your morning cup of joe.
So, Tracy, have you ever had somebody talk down to you?
Ooh, yes, I have.
It's kind of annoying, isn't it?
Very. Yeah. I'm not going to even give you that example because it's too bad.
Oh, my gosh.
It was my high school counselor. He was just very inappropriate. So,
Mine too.
what is it with high school counselors? I love them, loved them. We're counselors, so we can talk about this. He's passed away. He passed away this year. He was a very good man, but and I think he did it to motivate me, so it was kind of like that reverse psychology thing, and it worked. It really worked, but it was his methodology was not good.
Oh, mine told me I was never going to get into college with my grade. I had a 3.2.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't like I wasn't a 4.0 student, but my class ranking not great because we had 13 valedictorians.
Oh, wow.
And so,
Yeah.
he told me my class ranking was going to keep me out of college. And I was like, I have a great ACT score.
Mm-hmm.
I have a great SAT score. I have a decent GPA. I meet all the requirements except for class rank. How is this going to be a problem?
Nope.
Nope. Was no issue. None whatsoever. Even got scholarships. No big deal.
Well, I had a scholarship I went to Webster University my first year. So I guess we're talking about this. Anywho, so freshman year, I went to Webster University. I was going to major in psychology, so that was my field of study. And I think I was 12th in my class, so I think that was my ranking. I had pretty good GPA. I don't even remember what my GPA was. My ACT score was tanked. I was terrible. I'm not a good test taker, as in one of the other podcasts we did, I revealed to you that I don't do good on tests. This was his words. You're too stupid to go to college. You just need to get married, stay home, and have children.
Oh, my gosh. That's terrible.
Yeah, so my freshman year in college, I had a 4.0. I was on the dean's list. I graduated with my bachelor's, 4.0. Dean's list. Graduated with my master's, a 4.0. I was on the dean list, magna cum laude. So, too stupid, should have stayed home and have kids.
That's terrible.
So, but that's a sign to people who don't do good on tests. Even though your ACT score tanks, ACT scores are not always, generalized tests are not always a reflection of how well you can do in college. So, yeah.
Well, today, on that note, today we're going to talk about a psychology concept called transactional analysis. And I wanted to use an amazing movie that talks about aerospace engineering, kind of a call out to our aerospace engineers.
I love this movie. So good.
So this movie is about aerospace engineering, the space race, and 3 American heroes who overcame racism and sexism to make the Apollo space missions possible.
Mm-hmm.
So the movie's called Hidden Figures, and if you have not seen it, it is a absolutely fantastic movie.
Yeah, gotta see this movie if you haven't seen it.
Yes.
All-time fave.
It was released in 2016 to a whole lot of critical acclaim. And it surrounds 3 African-American women, Katherine Johnson, Mary Jackson, and Dorothy Vaughan. And all 3 women were hired to work at NASA at a time when the work units were segregated not only by gender, but also by race.
Uh-huh.
And however, when Catherine proves to be the only person capable of analytic geometry and the kind of math that was needed to troubleshoot the issues facing the space shuttle and getting to the moon, she is moved to working in a unit reserved for white men. The day after she gets there, they put out a separate coffee pot for her because nobody even wanted to share a coffee pot with her.
That was so interesting. I was feeling so overwhelmed when they did that to her. I was like, what?
Right.
You can't share a coffee pot? I did not understand that concept.
Yeah, they put a little note they put a separate coffee, a percolator coffee pot out. And then they put a note on there that said, colored on the coffee pot.
Yeah, like, I was like, and I was just like, what is happening here? And I was like, I finally was following. I was like, ugh.
Right.
Ugh. Yeah.
And there's not even, in the area, in the building that she's in, there's not even a bathroom she can use. So she has to go, for her to go to the bathroom, she has to literally run across the campus and go into the building where her original unit that she was out of, because they're like a temp unit, I want to say, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so like she has to go back to the building where the temp unit is located, and then she goes back there to use the bathroom. So it's like, what, 40 minutes, I think she said?
Really, 45 minutes, something like that.
Yeah.
Just to go to the bathroom.
Just to go to the bathroom. So she would hold it as long as she could and then race across campus, literally running in heels, because she's got a dress code she's required to adhere to. She's running across campus in heels, in the rain, in the elements, in order to just use the bathroom. And then on top of that, she's given all of these most demeaning tasks of just checking, like they give her notebook upon notebook. She's the only person who can do this kind of math there at this entire, facility. And she's given notebook upon notebook upon notebook to check other people's math instead of giving herself her own projects. And it's just, and they constantly question her skills and her thoughts and her intelligence, and it's just this constant, downplaying. And it culminates with this fantastic scene where she returns from the bathroom soaking wet because it's raining. And her boss, who's played by Kevin Costner, is really super angry because she's been missing for half an hour, and he confronts her. And he says to her that every time he needs her, she's gone. He's really super angry, he's aggressive, and Catherine, very assertively, I love this scene because it's just this mastery of assertiveness versus aggressiveness, and she just assertively tells him that she's been in the bathroom. And I'm going to quote it because I love this quote. She says, "There is no bathroom. There's no colored bathrooms in this building or in any building on the West Campus, which is half a mile away. Did you know that? I have to walk to Timbuktu just to relieve myself, and I can't use one of the handy bikes. Picture that, Mr. Harrison. My uniform, skirt below the knees, and my heels, and a simple string of pearls. Well, I don't own pearls. Lord knows you don't pay the colored enough to afford pearls. And I work like a dog day and night, living on coffee from a pot that none of you want to touch. So excuse me if I have to go to the restroom a few times a day."
Whew, that sounds so powerful.
That scene is just absolutely fantastic. Her boss, Kevin Costner's character, upon hearing this, he walks across campus to that bathroom, first he rips down the colored only sign in there, and then he goes down to the colored only sign off the bathroom. He goes across campus, rips the colored only sign off the bathroom that she's been using, and tells her to use the one closest to her workstation. And now I don't know if that's how this literally happened in real life, but it certainly makes for good cinema.
Yeah, definitely. So, I almost think it probably has, because just watching the amounts of segregation and where we've come across the timelines, it's probably been worse.
Right.
I would have to say. So, yeah.
Well, with just the scene with him ripping the thing, I don't know that it was that dramatic, when it originally happened.
Right.
But it's fantastic watching it, and I have no doubt on the adversity was worse than what was portrayed in the movie.
Right.
It was terrible. But what was fantastic about it was just the fact that this was unfair, and he reacted, and she came at it with assertiveness and grace,
Yep.
and eloquence, and he responded to it.
He came back with compassion.
Yes.
He actually came back with understanding, too, which was something she hadn't had.
Yes.
Yep.
What she needed.
She definitely needed. She definitely needed. And I think we all can say she responded with dignity, too.
Mm-hmm. And so I want to talk about how her boss spoke to her and how she responded and how her response changed that interaction. So like you said, she responded with dignity. Are you familiar with what transactional analysis is?
I think I remember something about it from school, but I don't know that I'm super familiar with it.
Well, it's transactional analysis basically states that when we come to every interaction, we come to it from one of three ego states. And ironically, transactional analysis comes from around the time that the movie was set. So some of the terms are a little bit dated, so kind of bear with me a little bit, okay? So transactional analysis was created by Eric Berne, and it has its roots in Freud's psychoanalytic theory. Berne believed that in our childhood, we learn a script of how to interact with others that can be either healthy or unhealthy, but basically how we learn to have our needs met. We do so by approaching each interaction from what are called ego states.
Ego, like the thing that gives you a big head?
Well, that's kind of how we use the term, like, but, you know, and that's us joking around. But ego is a psychology term that it kind of means ourself. And it's not necessarily a big head. But when people, like, in the general public hear ego, they think, you know, like, that person has a big ego. And they think the whole big head thing. But in psychology terms, as Tracy knows, like, joking aside, it's absolutely just means ourself.
Right.
And so the first ego state is the parent ego state. And this is the state where we exude authority, where we're the bosses. We are challenging. This ego state is domineering. It's aggressive. This ego state is, what do you think you're doing? It commands.
It talks down to the other person.
Absolutely. So what do you think somebody would want to do that? Why would they do that?
Well, if I'm talking down to someone, I'm not allowing the other person to disagree, and I'm taking control of the situation. I'm stepping on the other person, and I'm not respecting that person's boundaries. I'm being kind of selfish because I'm not worried about what the other person's needs are. And I'm only worried about what I need, and I'm going to push you down and just take what I need. It's about control and dominance. They're trying to establish themselves as an authority and remove the ability for anyone to question them.
Absolutely. So having the ability to ask questions and have that give and take gives us some agency. It gives us some level of power. And they are essentially taking that agency away from us. And this is the controlling ego, controlling critical ego state. The parent ego state also has another side, which is nurturing. So I want you to think of, like, when you think of parents, you have that, like, nurturing parent versus the strict parent, like, stereotypically, right? So the nurturing parent would be like that helicopter parent. They're not going to let you do it because you're not, you know, capable of doing it. You might get hurt. You're not going to be successful, that kind of thing. So in the same way that the strict parent takes your agency away because they're saying you're too stupid to do this, you're not that, the nurturing ego state says it's okay, you don't have to do this, you're you know, just sit down, you can't do this, you shouldn't have to, you know, that kind of thing. And it's talking down, but in a nicer way, I guess you put it. They'll just do things for you. They make you feel like you're incapable, that you need them to do it for you. And they're still taking your agency away, but they do it under a mask of trying to help you.
Almost sounds like they're somewhat still trying to treat you like a child, too.
Yes, and that's why they call it the parent ego state, because you're coming from that whole, this person, and it still makes you feel incapable. That's the underlying message of the parent ego state. Right. One does it aggressively, and then the other side of it does it through, you know, I'm just going to do everything for you. Both of them have the underlying message that you're not capable of doing it yourself.
Right.
So funny that we should bring up the parent as being a parent part.
Okay.
When somebody approaches the parent ego state, they're trying to force the other person into the child ego state. A child is controlled. A child doesn't do the controlling. So even when they're being nurturing, it's still coming from a desire to control the situation and get the other person to respond like a child and just give up. So it seems kind of demeaning to have someone treat you like a child, but thinking back, I can think of times that people have done that. Can you think of any?
I remember when I was in band, and I remember the band director just always being just really very condescending and treating me like a child, like I couldn't perform at the level that I was expected to. And he would always just say, Halbert, you're just stupid. He's like, you're not good enough for this, and you're just never going to perform good enough. And he would always just treat me like I was this little tiny little girl. And he was just always, I loved Mr. Moore, though. He was so fantastic, and he just always encouraged, but I was just never good enough. And it was so funny because he just treated me like I was just this big, very, very little. And he just things he would say was just like, yeah, never.
Just always treated you like you were small.
I was small, yeah. And until I actually learned how to play the clarinet good enough, I was always a little girl.
Right.
And I was always Halbert. And until I performed good, that's when I became Tracy.
Right. See, when I learned how to drive, my dad never taught me how to do basic car maintenance. Never even taught me how to put gas in my car. His idea of teaching me car maintenance was taking me to the gas station that was full service, and he's like, just tell these guys you want everything checked, and they'll check your fluids, and they'll check, put gas in your car and all that kind of stuff. And it was you feel so much like a child. I'm not even capable. I was a full-grown adult at this point. I was 18. 18 when I got my license. And so they, was I fully capable of putting gas in my own car? Yes.
Yeah.
Completely capable. But that was just, the attitude was that I couldn't. And I had to teach myself how to do that. And I had to teach myself how to check my fluids and check my oil and all that kind of thing.
Right.
And so, yeah, that's very much, I think we've all been there at some point where somebody's come and treated us like a child.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I think as I, grew into being able to find the keys on the horn and figure it out, I got it. But it was just when I was young to band. It was I just was this little girl and, not old enough to even know how to hold my instrument and blah, 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 blah. He's a fantastic band teacher, absolutely phenomenal. I adore him, honestly adore him. But it initially getting into band, I just felt like I was just this little girl who never could, do good enough. And now I just think the world of him because he's just a phenomenal teacher, phenomenal band teacher. But initially, when I was in band class, I just always felt like I was just this little girl all the time.
Well, and it's frustrating. And when somebody comes from that state, like in the movie, and they're being demeaning to you, and they're talking down to you, that's what they're trying to do. They're trying to treat you like a child. So let's talk about the ego state they're trying to place you in. The child ego state is more helpless, has less control. It's actually being controlled by others. So when somebody in a child ego state wants to control the situation, typically what they'll do is they'll do so through guilt manipulation.
Oh, yeah.
The parent state demands, the child state manipulates. So you see this often where people feign helplessness, and so they'll I can't do this, I need somebody else to do it for me, I don't understand, that kind of thing. They can be, but also alternatively, just like the parent state can be both, nurturing and demeaning, they can also be playful, creative, and often spontaneous. And it tends to be, but on the flip side, they tend to be selfish and pleasure-seeking, too.
Why would they want you to be in that ego state?
Well, ask yourself this. Do you ever consider children a threat?
So it's about making sure you don't threaten them in some way.
You're right. Like if somebody, like think about the movie, when you've got somebody that came in that could do this math that they couldn't do, was she a threat to them?
Definitely.
So by placing her into a child ego state, what were they doing?
Demeaning her, pushing her down.
And making her no longer a threat to them.
Right. Because they were the men. They were the ones who were supposed to be in authority. She was a woman. She didn't have any place there.
Right. So why would a grown adult allow themselves to be placed in that ego state?
Right. Well, some people choose it, and I bet we've all met people like this. Yeah, they're always joking around and not taking things seriously. So they all end up doing the work. Yeah. Or they even use weaponized incompetence. So they pretend to be incapable of doing the task, or they do it so badly that they'll take it over and finish it. And the child ego state can even be positive or negative, behaving or misbehaving. Essentially, it's typically passive aggressive in nature.
So, have you ever seen Mrs. Doubtfire?
Yes.
Robin Williams.
Williams, I love him.
He's my perfect example of a child ego state. Like at the very beginning of the movie, like literally had a pony in the living room. He's a grown man.
Right.
But what is he expecting Sally Field to be in that situation? Because he was approaching the situation as a child, in that child ego state, he forced Sally Field into the adult ego state. And she talks about it later in the movie, saying, like, I hated, and I'm paraphrasing because it's been a really long time since I brought this movie, and this is totally off the script and way off of left field. But when she's talking about it, she mentions the fact that she felt like she always had to play the bad guy. She always had to be the one to rein in the fun, and he got to be the fun one. He got to do all the... Why? Because he relied on her to be the responsible person. So in that case, was that somebody in a child ego state using it as a form of manipulation? Yeah. And that's a star example of that process. Yeah,
he always was the one who could just hang out with the kids, have fun, do whatever. She's the one who had to set the boundaries. She had to set the expectations. And so she ended up being the bad person all the time.
Yeah.
And he could get away with doing anything.
Yeah, and it wasn't fair to her.
No.
Right. So just like you can weaponize the parent ego state, you can absolutely weaponize the child ego state too.
Yep, absolutely.
So the goal of the child ego state is to get the other person to take control or fulfill their own needs. So this would be the person that badly does the dishes, because if I do them badly, you're going to come behind me and I won't have to do them again.
Right, sure. So you said there was 3. So what's the last one, Amber?
Well, the last one is the adult ego state. So this state is about respecting yourself, but it's also about respecting the other person. This state is not about domination. It's rational. It's non-judgmental. It seeks to create common ground and understanding. So it comes from a place of seeking to be heard and to have the other person to be heard and to hear the other person. Isn't that it's not emotional. It's that we're not using the other person's emotions as a weapon, or our emotions as a weapon on the other person.
So emotions as a weapon, what do you mean by this? Explain that a little bit more.
Well, have you ever had somebody try to make you feel guilty? That would be like the nurturing parent's ego state, or use tears to manipulate you. You catch them doing something wrong and they instantly burst into tears. That's the child ego state. Or they use their anger to try to intimidate you and manipulate you. That's another version of the parenting ego state. That's the critical parent state.
So I've never thought of emotions as being able to be used as a weapon.
Well, they absolutely can, and they're a pretty powerful one indeed, because we can easily see that the critical parent state as being harmful and controlling, but so is the child ego state. Even though you may not feel controlled, are your actions still being controlled? Yeah. And same way with the nurturing parent state. Even though what they're doing feels like it's supposed to be kindness, do you feel like it's kindness when it's done, or do you feel controlled? You feel
Don't
controlled.
feel controlled, yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
And this goes back to one of my favorite sayings, and I've said this on this podcast like a million times in my healthy relationships group. I always reiterate this repeatedly. Passive aggressive is still aggressive.
Say it louder for those in the back.
Passive aggressive is still aggressive.
It's amazing how much people write off passive aggressiveness as not being a threat. I get that it's not confrontational, but it still can be very controlling and limiting.
Yes.
So, Amber, what do we do with this information?
Well, there's a lot of different transactions that can happen. So we have, when we come at from a certain state, we can have parent to parent. That's a domineering person to a domineering person, or a nurturing person to a nurturing person. You can have the child to child, where two people are just kind of playing each other and seeing, playing with each other and using the guilt, manipulation and those kind of, where they're just joking around and nobody's being serious. You can have adult to adult, where people are having calm, rational conversations as adults. But commonly, you have that parent to child. So the person comes at a parent ego state, and their thought is, when I come at you at a parent, you're going to respond as a child, and I'm going to get what I want. Or if I come as a child, you're going to respond as a parent and do what I want you to do. So it's kind of that, you think of a child saying, "Mommy, can you give me a glass of milk?" And then the parent responds, "Yes, I'll do this thing for you." That's kind of where that child ego state is saying. Mm-hmm. And then the parent ego state is saying, "Sit down and be quiet." And then the child ego state sits down and be quiet. You see how that kind of works. Mm-hmm. Both of them are trying to manipulate behavior through different mechanisms.
When I'm hearing you talk, my mind is going to this whole state of all these parent ego states and child ego states. My mind goes off into left field sometimes when we have these podcasts, but I know, right, Tracy, the overthinker. I hear students a lot of times, they come back from winter break, spring break, all these different breaks, and they talk about how there's confrontations with parents, and mm-hmm. sometimes they have really good contact with parents. And so when you think about all these different states, there's a lot of interesting conversations, I think, that happen over breaks with parents, because mm-hmm. when you think about it, parents want to know how their kids are doing.
Yeah.
Kids, that seminar that we went to the other day, was it this? Yeah. They talked about how, was that seminar, or was I listening to something else? Maybe it was something else I was listening to. It talked about how when children go home on break. No, I was listening to the news this morning. That's what it was. I was listening to the news this morning, and it was saying that Christmas time and people going home, that 25% of people, a quarter of people surveyed, said that they didn't look forward to going home at Christmas time. Mm-hmm. And it was because typically parents, children, or just people in general, not children, but people in general, typically get into arguments and fights with their parents during vacations, holidays, things of this nature. I thought, isn't that interesting? So how does this relate to parent ego states and ego states?
You think about it, how have things always been? Uh-huh. Like, if things have always been with them, the parent ego state uh-huh. being, your parents always being in that parent ego state every time you see them. Mm-hmm. And then now you're no longer a child, and you go back home and they're trying to shove you back in that child box. How do you think that's going to go?
Right, exactly.
I'm going to be fairly uncomfortable. That box isn't going to fit anymore, and I'm not going to like it. And I'm going to be like, no, guess what? I'm 21. I'm no longer grounded. Mm-hmm. You can't ground me anymore.
Right.
And so then it doesn't fit. Mm-hmm. And so, but the thing is with parents, because that's the way they've learned to interact with you, for some people it can be hard. Even though their child may be 40, mm-hmm. they may have a difficult time adjusting to that.
Right.
So some parents do a great job with it. Some parents struggle. And that's okay, but it's a readjusting the way that relationship looks and how those transactions take place.
Right, exactly. So, when I was here, when we were doing this podcast today, I was thinking, in time, we still see sexism, we still see ageism, we still see racism, we see all these different types of transactions that are happening in our society today.
Mm-hmm.
Here on this campus, we see things that come out exactly like you brought up with the different types of ego states. And when we see these types of different transactional analyses that are happening, right, we see things that are happening such as students, not kids, but students go home. And what's happening is parents want to know, how are you doing in your classes?
Mm-hmm.
How are you performing on tests?
Mm-hmm.
How's things going with your scholarships?
Mm-hmm.
How are you socially connecting?
Well, but if you're an adult asking another adult, how invasive do those questions feel?
Right. And so then it's demeaning, then it's bringing you back into those, transactions where it's kind of like, why do you need to know all this about me? Why is it so important that you know all this stuff? So then all those things happen, and it's kind of like, I forget what her name was. Tell me what her name was again.
Catherine Johnson.
Catherine. So then it's kind of like that whole bringing back where Kevin Costner was wanting to know, why were you at the bathroom for so long?
Right.
And it was kind of like she had a reason for why she was doing what she was doing. You as students, you have reasons for doing why you're doing what you're doing.
Mm-hmm.
And so your parents care about you. They're concerned about you. They do want to know that you're doing okay on campus.
Uh-huh.
And so that's why they ask you 10 million questions.
They're still your parents.
They're still your parents.
And you're still, no matter if you are 40, you're still their kid.
Right.
But it's hard to adjust that because you go from, here's somebody that at one point need you to do every single solitary thing for them, and then now they're completely self-sufficient. That's a hard adjustment to make, even over 20 years.
It is a hard adjustment. I mean, I think about it like my mom lives with us, and she's still every day wants to know how my day was, how things are going, blah, 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 blah. And I think our parents are always going to be that way to some certain level of,
Absolutely.
In our lives.
So that goes into the key part of this podcast. How do we combat against it? So if somebody comes at us from a parent ego state or somebody comes at it from a child ego state, how do we counteract that? We come at it from an adult ego state.
Right.
And we set our boundaries.
Boundaries. And that's where we have to get to. Healthy boundaries.
Yes.
And that's what Harriet did, right? Is she set that healthy boundary and she was assertive.
Catherine
was assertive. What did I say, Harriet?
Uh-huh.
I'm on, you know what movie I'm on, don't you? Lessons in chemistry.
Oh, yes.
Sorry, we've been talking about another movie. I won't jump ship and go to that one. But yeah, so Catherine, she set boundaries. She used assertive language. And so this is that important piece for all of us to learn is using I language.
Yes.
And being assertive and asserting what our needs are.
Mm-hmm. I feel statements, saying things, don't be accusatory, use the I statements and come at it, state your boundary clearly, which I don't know that she necessarily stated a boundary, but she clearly expressed the problem she was facing.
Yeah, she talked to her needs.
Yeah.
And that need was, I have to go across campus to go to the bathroom. That was the problem. She stated the problem. She stated the other issue with the coffee pot.
Yeah.
And he obviously could see she was drenching wet.
Right.
And she didn't even have to speak to that. But I think he could see that there was genuine harm coming to her by what was happening. And the fact that she spoke up and talked to her need. If you're struggling, speak to that. I think that there's power to that and speaking to that. So if you're struggling, speak to that. Use that I language. So if you're struggling in chemistry, speak to that. If you're struggling in circuits, I know I've heard circuits is a hard class on this campus. Speak to that. But, don't feel like you're being demeaned by someone, by them saying, well, you need to work, you need to tell me what's going on. You need to share everything with me. You don't have to share everything with people.
No.
But if you are struggling, reach out for help. And I think that's that place for us. Amber and I are both counselors here on this campus, and that's the main reason we do this podcast, is we want you to know that we're here, that we aren't, a bunch of strangers over sitting in Norwood Hall, behind on the second floor. And, we're here, we're real people, and that you can reach out to us and talk to us.
Well, and sometimes it doesn't feel like we should have to.
Yeah.
Like it feels like we shouldn't have to tell people how they're hurting us. But it's kind of like the example with Kevin Costner in there. Like, should he have been able to see?
Yeah.
Had his eyes open and see? Well,
Yeah.
absolutely, he should have.
Yeah.
Like, what was going on was 100% wrong, but
Yeah.
was because of the time and the situation he lived in, and the social and cultural norms of the time. Was he blinded to that? Yeah, he was. And that doesn't make it right.
No.
He, once he was made aware of it, made steps to try to repair it.
Yeah.
And
change it.
To change it,
Yeah.
change the situation. And that's positive. And it doesn't undo the damage. We've talked about that kind of stuff before. But you find a lot of people are blind to the damage that their behavior does,
Yeah.
for whatever reason. And so when you come at them in an assertive way and you say, this is the problem you're creating, the person obviously should have seen it.
Yeah.
And sometimes we feel like that this person should know what they did wrong. But when we're able to say calmly and directly, this is how this is impacting me, sometimes it takes those blinders off the other person that they have for whatever reason.
Right.
I mean, it could be trauma in their youth. Like, we have no idea. But whatever the reason, we take those blinders off. And a lot of times that can help us get situation where it's less damaging to us.
Right, exactly. And we just being aware, I think that's very important. So absolutely. So
And honoring our boundaries. So how we can use this, we approach other people, we ask them, we look at how they're approaching us and the attitude that they're approaching with us, and kind of look at what ego state. If somebody's talking down to us and being demeaning, or they're coming from that parent ego state, how can I respond in a way that's going to bring them down to that adult state? If they're coming from the child ego state, if I come at the adult state, that's going to bring them up to the adult ego state. So we're trying to meet everybody at that place where we're honoring each other's boundaries. And sometimes we have to set the boundary and say something like, I don't deserve to be talked to that way. I think that's one of my favorite ones to say, by the way. If somebody's being passive aggressive, what boundaries do I need to set to protect myself? It's addressing how that person is approaching us.
right, exactly. Good information.
So thanks for joining us today, minors, and we'll see you next week.
Take care.
For more information about mental health and wellness, contact Student Wellbeing at 204 Norwood Hall. And you can also give us a call at 573-341-4211.
The song Happy Days is brought to us by music from www.free-stock-music.com. You can also add and follow us on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook using our handle @S&T Wellbeing.